Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The autumn air crackled with magic as Lingerie stood at the entrance of the library. The towering stone structure loomed before him, its ancient walls whispering secrets through the cracks between the brick. Every corner of the magical academy of Arcanas pulsed with life, but the library nestled at the far end of the academy grounds was alive with something different, something older and more powerful. It was here deep within these walls that Horian hoped to find the answers he sought. He hesitated, his hand gripping the brass door handle, the weight of the past pressed against his chest, a heaviness that had followed hhim since that fateful day. Miata's face flashed in his mind, her bright eyes, her laugh, and the pain that twisted her features after his spell had backfired. It had been a simple task, a spell they had practiced together, but something had gone wrong. Mia had been hurt because of him. That wound, both physical and emotional, still lingered. It was all his fault. Horian exhaled sharply, pushing the door open. The library greeted him with the scent of aged paper and polished wood, the faint hum of magical energy drifting through the air. Shelves rose high above him, filled with books of every size and color. The deeper you went, the older the tomes became, their spines cracked with time and knowledge. Horian wasn't interested in the everyday texts or even the advanced spell books reserved for senior students. No, tonight, he sought something far more dangerous, something forbidden. He moved with purpose through the labyrinth of bookshelves, his fingers trailing along the spines of the volumes as if they might guide him to what he needed. His heart pounded in his chest, a mix of excitement and fear. He had heard the rumors, the whispered stories of the time chamber, a hidden room deep within the library where the most ancient and dangerous spells were kept, spells that could alter reality itself. For weeks, Horian had scoured the academy for clues, piecing together hints from the oldest records, listening to fragments of conversations between professors. Tonight, he had found the final piece of the puzzle, a passage hidden in the back of a forgotten manuscript that mentioned a spell capable of turning back time. The answer to everything. If he could reverse time, he could fix his mistake. He could make sure Mia was never harmed. His footsteps echoed in the quiet halls as he approached the farthest corner of the library. The air grew cooler, and the light dimmed as though the room itself knew he was treading into forbidden territory. Horian's pulse quickened. He had to be close. There, in the farthest corner of the library, behind a shelf of ancient texts, stood an old wooden door nearly invisible against the dark stone wall. The door was plain, unmarked, but Horian could feel the hum of magic seeping from behind it. His hand trembled as he reached for the handle. This was it, the time chamber. The door creaked open, and Horian stepped inside. The room was small, its walls lined with books far older than any he had seen in the main library. In the center stood a pedestal, and atop it rested a single ancient tome. Its cover was made of dark, cracked leather, and the title was written in a language Horian didn't recognize. But he need to understand the words to know what it was. This was the spell book, the one that held the magic he sought. Horian approached the pedestal, his heart hammering in his chest. As he opened the book, a gust of cold air swept through the room, as if the very fabric of time shifted with the turning of the pages. The text within was written in a script that shimmered with a faint golden glow, the letters twisting and changing as he stared at them. He could feel the power radiating from the pages, a deep, ancient magic that had not been touched in centuries. His eyes scanned the page, and there it was, the spell of time reversal. It was beautiful in its simplicity, yet complex in a way that made his head spin. He read the instructions carefully, his mind racing with the possibility. If he could cast this spell, he could return to that day, to the moment before Mia had been hurt. He could undo everything. But a warning at the bottom of the page caught his eye. The script darkened, as though the letters were burned into the parchment. Time is a fragile thread. To pull on it is to risk unraveling everything. Horian swallowed hard. He had heard the warnings before. Time magic was forbidden for a reason. But the image of Maya lying in the infirmary, her body weak and fragile, haunted him. He couldn't leave her like that. He wouldn't. He closed the book and tucked it under his arm. The weight of it was both comforting and terrifying. As he made his way back through the library, the thought of what he was about to do gnawed at him, but there was no turning back now. Later that night, Heron stood in his dormitory, the spellbook open on the floor before him. The room was dimly lit by a single candle, its flickering light casting shadows across the wall. Heron had cleared the space of furniture, leaving only himself, the book, and the magical sigils he had drawn on the floor in chalk. The instructions had been precise, and he had followed them to the letter. Now all that remained was to cast the spell. His heart pounded in his chest as he knelt before the book. He took a deep breath, focusing on the image of that day, Mia's laughter, the way her hair had glinted in the sunlight, and the moment everything had gone wrong. He closed his eyes and began to chant. The words felt foreign on his tongue, like they didn't belong in the world of the living. As he spoke, the air around him grew heavy, thick with magic. The room seemed to warp, the walls bending and twisting as if the very fabric of reality was being stretched. A cold wind swept through the room, snuffing out the candle, leaving him in darkness. Hatboren kept chanting, his voice steady even as the room spun around him. The sigils on the floor glowed a bright blue, and he felt a strange pull in his chest, like he was being drawn backward through space and time. His body felt weightless, and for a moment, everything went black. When Hatboren opened his eyes, he was no longer in his dormitory. He was standing outside in the academy courtyard. The sun was shining, the air warm and fresh. He blinked, disoriented. Had the spell worked? His heart leapt as he saw her. Mia was sitting on the edge of the fountain, her back to him, just as she had been that day. She was laughing, talking to a group of their friends. Horan's breath caught in his throat. This was it. He had done it. He had gone back. For a moment, he stood frozen, overwhelmed by the reality of what he had just accomplished. But then he remembered why he was here. He had to stop it. He had to keep Mia from casting that spell, the one that had gone wrong. He had to protect her. He ran toward the fountain, his heart racing. Mia, he called, his voice breathless with urgency. She turned, her face lighting up when she saw him. Heron and what's that? Thra. He skidded to a stop in front of her, panting. Don't cast that spell. The one we talked about earlier. It's dangerous. Mia frowned, tilting her head. Trust me, Heron said, grabbing her hands. Just trust me. I can try to explain it, but something bad will happen if you do it. Please promise me you won. Mia hesitated, her eyes searching his face. Then, after a long moment, she nodded. Okay, I promise. Relief flooded through Heron's chest, and he pulled her into a tight hug. He had done it. He had fixed the past. Mia was saying, but the relief was short-lived. As the days passed, strange things began to happen. At first, they were small, almost unnoticeable. Objects would disappear and reappear in different places. Conversations Hatboren swore he had never had seemed to be remembered by his friend. The colors of the sky shifted unnaturally at sunset, casting the academy in hues that made the world feel off. Then came the dreams. Hatboren would wake in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, his heart racing. In the dreams he was running through the academy, but it wasn't the same. The walls were twisted, the halls endless, shadows lurked in every corner, whispering in a language he didn't understand. And always at the edge of his vision there was something chasing him, something dark and hungry. Heron's nightmares intensified with every passing night. The creature that lurked in the shadows became more tangible, more real, as though it wasn't her confined to his dreams alone. During the day, he tried to focus on his studies, on Mia, on anything that could keep his mind away from the unsettling distortions in reality. But the world around him was growing stranger. Entire conversations vanished from people, memories and certain days felt shorter, like time itself was skipping ahead without warning. It wasn't long before Hatboren began to see the figure, not just in his dreams, but in the waking world. At first, it was a flicker, a shadow out of the corner of his eye. But then it began to linger, following him through the academy, always just out of sight. He could feel it watching him, waiting. It grew stronger. Every time he used the time magic, Hatboren tried to ignore it, telling himself that it was just a figment of his guilt, a consequence of tampering with forces he did understand. But the more he tried to deny its presence, the more it became impossible to overlook. The very air around him seemed heavier, more oppressive. His friends noticed the change, though no one could pinpoint exactly what was wrong. Some nights, the time distortions would warp the academy itself, stairs leading to nowhere, hallways that stretched far too long, and students who claimed to have seen parts of the academy that didn't exist. And then Mia began to fade. It started slowly, one afternoon, as they were sitting together in the courtyard. Her laughter suddenly stopped. Henry turned to look at her, and for a moment her image flickered like a candle struggling to stay lit. He blinked, and she was solid again, but the moment shook him to his core. "Mia, are you feeling okay?" he asked, his voice thick with worry. She gave him a confused smile, of course. Why wouldn't he be? Hiram forced a grin, but his stomach twisted into knots. As the days passed, her flickers became more frequent. At times, her voice would fade out mid-sentence, or she seemed to disappear for a few seconds, only to reappear in the same place without even realizing anything had happened. No one else noticed it, but Hurrian couldn't he shake the growing dread that he had done something terribly, irreversibly wrong. He had altered time, and now it was unraveling. Desperate for answers, Hardoran sought out Professor Eldrin, the only one who might understand the magic he had used. The professor had always been a distant figure, his knowledge vast but his patience thin for students who strayed from the path of traditional learning. Still, Hiram had no choice. He had to find a way to fix what he had broken. When he arrived at Eldrin's office, he could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The professor was hunched over a collection of ancient scrolls when Horan entered, and for a moment he acknowledged the student's presence. But then, without looking up, Eldrin spoke. "I know why you were here, Horan." The word sent a chill down Hordan's spine. He swallowed hard, stepping forward. "Professor, I need your help. I've done something." "Something foolish." "Yes," Eldrin interrupted, finally lifting his gaze. His eyes were sharp, penetrating. "Time magic is not a toy, and yet you treated it as such. I warned you." Hayran felt the weight of the professor's judgment, but he couldn't argue. "I thought I could fix things. I didn't train for this to happen." Eldrin sighed, standing from his desk and moving toward a shelf filled with ancient tome. "None of you young ones ever do, but time is not something that can be molded to your will without consequence. Every action, every change creates ripples, some of them minor, some catastrophic." Hiram's chest tightened. "Mia, she's still fading. I don't know what to do." Eldrin turned to face him, his expression grim. "You have torn the fabric of time itself. The distortions you've created are feeding something far worse than you can imagine." The professor gestured for Harian to follow him to the back of the room, where an ancient map of the academy hung on the wall. Eldrin pointed to a section of the map that Harian didn't recognize, a space beyond the known halls and rooms of the academy. "There is a place, a vortex of time distortions created by your meddling. It draws all the chaos of your actions into one point, feeding on the fractures in time. The creature you've foreseen, the one haunting you, it's a time wraith, a being that thrives on the disruption of time. It grows stronger with every passing moment, and if it's not stopped, it will consume everything, including me." The words struck Horan like a blow. The time wraith, it wasn't he just a shadow following him. It was a predator growing more powerful because of him. How do I stop it? Eldrin's gaze darkened. There's only one way. You must travel to the heart of the distortion, to the time vortex, and confront the wraith. Only there can you undo the damage, but be warned, if you fail, the timeline will collapse completely, and everything you know will cease to exist. Hiram's mind raced. He had no choice. He couldn't let Mia fade away. He couldn't let the wraith consume the academy. "I'll do it, whatever it takes." The professor nodded, though his expression remained grave. "You will need help. The vortex is unstable, and the wraiths will not let you approach it easily." Mia insisted on coming with him, even though she started fading more frequently. Her resolve was unshakable. Hauserin tried to convince her to stay behind to keep herself safe, but Mia's connection to the time magic, her place in the timeline, made her an essential part of the journey. They gathered supplies and set out toward the farthest, most desolate part of the academy. As they traveled through the twisted hallways, the signs of time's unraveling became more severe. Entire rooms had disappeared, leaving nothing but voids of darkness. Hagoan could feel the pull of the vortex, a tugging sensation that seemed to reach deep into his soul, drawing him closer to the heart of the disturbance. By the time they reached the entrance to the vortex, the air itself felt wrong, thick with a strange energy that made Haran's skin prickle. The world around them shimmered, as if reality were hanging by a thread. Ahead, a swirling mass of light and shadow awaited them, the entrance to the time vortex. Mia grabbed Haran's hand, her fingers cold but steady. "We in this together," she said softly. Haran nodded, though his heart pounded with fear. "Together." They stepped into the vortex, and the world around them dissolved into chaos. Time fractured, moments from the past and future flashing before their eyes in rapid succession. Harry could barely make sense of it all, scenes from his childhood visions of a future he didn't recognize, fragments of conversations that had never happened. It was disorienting, terrifying. And then in the center of the storm, he saw it, the time wraith. It stood at the heart of the vortex, a massive shadowy figure with eyes that glowed like embers. Its form was ever-shifting, twisting, and contorting as though it was made of the very fabric of time itself. It let out a low guttural growl as it turned its gaze on Howard and Mia, its eyes locking onto them with an almost predatory intensity. Ingurian's heart seized with terror. The creature was far more powerful than he had imagined. Its presence was suffocating, the weight of its power pressing down on him like a tidal wave. We have to stop it," Mia whispered, her voice barely audible over the roar of the vortex. Howard nodded, though he had no idea how they could defeat something like this. The wraith was feeding off the chaos of time, growing stronger with every moment. But then, as he stared into its glowing eyes, an idea began to form in his mind. The wraith was tied to the distortions in time. Her insights had given it power. But if he could undo those mistakes, if he could repair the timeline, maybe, just maybe, he could weaken it. "Mia, I need you to trust me," Hungaren said, his voice tight with determination. "I am going to reverse the damage, but it's going to mean losing everything we've chained." Mia looked at him, her eyes wide with understanding. She nodded. The Horin could see the fear in her gaze. "Do it?" Hadarian took a deep breath, focusing all his energy on the spell that had started this nightmare. The words came to him easily, now the ancient magic flowing through him like a river. He spoke the incantation, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them. The wraith let out a terrible roar, sensing what Harun was doing. It lunged toward them, its form rippling with fury, but Harun didn't stop. He poured every ounce of his power into the spell, pulling the threads of time back together, mending the fractures he had created. And then just as the wraith was upon them, the world around them shattered. For a moment, everything was white, blinding, endless white. When Hanawaran opened his eyes, he was standing in the academy courtyard. The sun was shining, the air warm, everything was back to the way it had been before. But Mia was gone. Hanawaran's chest tightened with grief, but he knew it had to be this way. He had fixed the timeline, the wraith was gone, and the academy was safe. But the costs had been high. He had lost her. As he stood there staring at the fountain where she had once sat, Harun felt a strange sense of peace. He had done the right thing. He had saved the academy, and though Mia was gone, her memory would remain with him always.